Welcome to the Marketing Meeting podcast. And my guest today is Dan Frommer. He is the founder and editor-in-chief of The New Consumer. The New Consumer is a publication covering consumer behavior, brands, and how people live and spend today. Before starting The New Consumer, Dan was editor-in-chief of Recode at Vox Media. And he was also one of the first employees of Business Insider, which we all know and follow now. Welcome, Dan, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure.
I'm going to tell you a story about yourself, how I get to know you, because back then I was living in Turkey, not US. So it was 2020, it was right the time of COVID and so on. I was searching for the report of Mary Meeker. For many people, they would know who Mary Meeker is. She used to publish annual internet trends, which I used to follow. It was just like, I think 400 pages or whatever, I don't know. At that time, we don't have any ChatGPT or whatever to ask for a summary.
Right.
So I was reading them all and I was searching for her report and I wasn't able to find it, but I get to find your report there. I think it was the early years of The Consumer.
The first one, yeah.
I searched, you showed up organically on a search result. This is how I get to know
Amazing.
you. Could you tell me what The New Consumer is and how you started these publications?
Yes. So I started The New Consumer 7 years ago, but I've been a business journalist for 21 years now, mostly covering technology. And I started writing about telecom at Forbes before the iPhone came out. And then the iPhone was really a life-changing moment for me and also for a lot of people. It showed me how technology can just profoundly change the world. Everything from the App Store to peer-to-peer marketplaces to on-demand, everything to, the sharing economy, Uber, everything, Airbnb was really predicated on the iPhone. And then kind of that ran out of interesting news stories for a while. So this was 2018, 2019, I was really obsessed with the direct-to-consumer e-commerce boom and had been running a technology website called Recode and thought I could start something new that kind of analyzes this intersection of consumer and tech. And that was perhaps best expressed by those DTC brands, but so many different things happening in consumer where brands just became so much easier to start and get attention and distribution through technology, through e-commerce, through social media. It was just a new era for brands and a new era for consumer behavior because of e-commerce, because of social media, just new ways for people to discover things, to buy them, to talk about them. And I just thought that was fascinating. And no one was writing the sort of articles and analysis about those topics that I wanted to read. So I knew I had to be the one to do that. And it's, like I said, it's been 7 years. It's been an amazing experience. Newconsumer.com is the easiest way for people to get started. It is primarily a website and newsletter that I send 1 or 2 times a week. And then also a huge part of what I do is this consumer trend report. So you mentioned Mary Meeker. Mary was a huge inspiration for me. She used to speak at our conference, at the Recode conference, and launch her new report and go through 400 slides. Well, probably not all 400, but let's say 200 slides in 30 minutes. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. So it was very funny, not funny, but coincidental that the year that she stopped doing those reports, which was the COVID year, 2020, is when I started doing my reports, which are called Consumer Trends. And I work with a venture capital fund in New York called Coefficient Capital on these reports. We've done so many now that I've lost count. I want to say it's around 15. We do 4 of them a year now. And they're very data-driven, simple to understand, simple to read, opinionated look at the consumer ecosystem or the consumer landscape through the lens of charts. And we look at all kinds of different topics from protein to GLP-1s to AI to e-commerce, TikTok shop, just any topic, YouTube, podcasts, whatever it is, and do a deep analysis of a sector, showing where the growth is, what's driving growth, and how our consumer behavior is changing in ways that we believe are not fads, that we believe are long-term permanent shifts in behavior and thinking. They're investors. I'm a journalist and analyst. We're looking for things that we can build companies around and build our reputation around, not just things that are popping for 1 minute. And those have become kind of the most popular thing I do. I think they're great. They're anywhere from 50 to 150 slides per report, and we do a new one every few months. We just launched one last month called the Food and Beverage Special. We launched it at the Expo West's trade show in California and went through 4 big topics, including kind of this idea of peak protein, where do consumers actually want to get their protein from, and also a deep dive into functional beverage and the future of the beverage category. But again, we talk about all kinds of different things. And then I go through the reports for members of my newsletter in greater depth and, share some more kind of the director's cut with the readers as well. So it's become a really fun thing for me to produce, and is kind of the biggest thing I do now.
So we're going to talk about the consumer and the new consumer now today.
Great.
Yeah. And I used to work at Nike for almost 2 decades, and everything was starting with the consumer. Like, what's the consumer doing? And then when someone is visiting our country or region, we used to do like the consumer deep dives and so on. And for example, this morning, I was just like, after a workout, I was taking my NAD, collagen powder and creatine powder, of course, not the GLP, luckily. And then, I was going through the questions that I was going to ask you. And I always find it a little bit hilarious for marketers and for us talking about the consumer as if it's a species that we are discovering and exploring, whereas it's us actually, just like me taking the creatine and the protein in the morning. It's actually us. So
I'm about to take mine. So yeah,
we are going to always talk now about the consumer, and my questions will be some kind of a species that we are exploring right now, but it's actually us that we would be talking. So what's the state of, first of all, one question for when I say consumer, is it the American consumer that you are doing the insights on these reports, or like a wider consumer other than the American?
We mostly focus on the U.S. consumer because that's where, that's what we know the best. It is, there are a lot of things that are pretty common across the Western world. Obviously, people do things differently in Europe and South America and Asia than they do in the U.S., but Coefficient invests primarily in U.S. companies. My readership is primarily U.S. based, and we're both small teams. So I'm a team of 1 person. So ideally, I would have a more global footprint, but right now we do focus on the U.S. consumer.
So in that case, how do you explain the state of the American consumer today? Just like, what they are eating and drinking nowadays, more of and less of, let's say.
Yeah, the consumer is fascinating because there are 350 million of them in the U.S. and so everybody's different. But in many ways, people act similarly. There are some limitations on what you can do as a human being and what you have to do. Although the internet has given people just vastly more choice over how they can consume than they ever had before. So that's cool. You don't only have the 3 brands that your local grocery store carries. You have access to almost anything in the world now. So people can be different. They still are, they still do act the same in many ways. There's, of course, a difference between what people want to do and what they're actually doing. So if you look at what people want to do, there's a really, really strong interest in health and wellness. We do a proprietary survey every few months of 3,000 people. And every year we ask people, what are the 3 things you want to eat more of, eat or consume more of this year? And what are the 3 things you want to consume less of this year? And number 1, more, is always vegetables every year. Everyone, and this is not choose from a list. This is write it in. We make people write words. And the first thing you learn is, wow, people spell the word vegetables a lot of different ways. So now we have a great tool in Claude, which helps us, obviously analyze the text and group together all the different ways that people spell the word vegetables. But there is still a lot of virtue signaling around things like vegetables and fruit. But protein is something that continues to rise on that list. It went up quite a bit over the last year and is now, I believe, the second most popular thing that people wrote in. But fruit also always does well on that list. Water, people feel like they need to be more hydrated. But then if you look at what people are actually consuming, and that is where I believe in surveys are great for trying to understand perhaps how people think, at least how they're willing to admit they think, but nothing beats actual sales and transaction data for what people are really doing and what they're really spending their money on. So we're fortunate to partner again with Instacart this year, the largest online grocery marketplace in the US, and learn from them what people are actually buying. And that's where there's, the number one selling product on Instacart is bananas. So that's, that's always going to be there. But if you look at the categories that are growing on Instacart, it's things like Greek yogurt, Icelandic yogurt, protein bars, water, avocados, protein drinks. So these are things that are large categories that are growing very fast. And so those actually do match up quite closely with a lot of the trends in terms of what people say they want to consume. Green vegetables, perhaps not growing as quickly as people, that's more of a flat category, but people are consuming more. This protein thing is real. It's not imagined. It's not a fad. People, for various reasons, are strongly believe that protein is important to them. The U.S. government, which is somewhat dictated by emotions in many ways these days, but also just dramatically increased the recommendation for protein intake. So that I believe is a real thing, and that will continue. And water is just, convenience, and also there is perhaps some drive to be more hydrated. Although I think that was I think the Stanley water thing, I think that was a fad, not a trend. I think that's pretty much over now. But I think there's always going to be, as long as convenience is a crucial part of the U.S. experience, water will continue to grow too.
Yeah. Do you think you had an article, I think, or some kind of a newsletter about protein, because I think it's one of the most significantly rising, and as a trend is on the rise every year, I guess. But I don't know if we are at the peak protein or not. Are we do you think that this trend will go on and on, or is it just now kind of stabilizing?
I don't think we've hit the peak in any way, because we asked in our research a lot of questions about consumers and protein. And first of all, the number of people who have started really paying attention to protein, the majority of them, I believe, or at least a huge percentage of them, only really started in the last year. So it's very new for a lot of people. Okay. And there are lots of different ways to get protein. You can get it by eating food, like for food that's naturally high in protein, fish, chicken, soybeans, that sort of thing. Or increasingly, you can get every product on earth that has protein added to it. And many of those products are still pretty niche. Obviously, protein bars are a pretty mature category. There's a lot of innovation there that is, some of it's good, some of it's not, and that will continue. Yeah. But now is when we really are starting to see companies add protein to so many random different types of food. From water, we were talking about water a second ago. You can get protein water now. You can get protein almost anything. And so one thing we were very curious about is, there's protein candy, there's protein chips. At that Expo West trade show, half the booths were basically, we've added protein to this thing that, you've been eating for your whole life, pretzels or whatever it is. So we were curious about a couple things, which is where in this product range are people actually interested in trying products with protein added to them? And then where does it actually feel natural to add protein to those? And the products that were kind of in the positive for both of those things were pretty obvious categories. Cereal, for example, something that people really like, but is very carb heavy. And if you can make cereal more healthy, you are going to be successful. We've seen companies like Magic Spoon and others really become really large, successful companies based on simply making cereal a more healthy protein forward category. Snack bars is another one that's probably the most obvious. And then milk, and that's another one where you can add protein to milk, but you can also ultra filter it, micro filter it, and have a higher protein content. And that's one of the more interesting categories in beverage right now is this kind of high protein milk. And there's Fairlife, which is a huge brand, but you're starting to see more organic and kind of better for you versions of that as well. Not to say that Fairlife is bad for you, although they have some products that are probably full of sugar. So those are pretty obvious. Pasta is another one, which again, people love pasta. Pasta is considered to be not the healthiest thing because it's very high in carbs. So even though it's very enjoyable. So high protein pasta, if you can make it taste good, is something that's appealing to consumers. Then there's categories that are very negative in both of those things. Things like beer, actually beer perform the worst, even though there's protein beer on the market now and also cocktails. Yeah, well, hey, I mean, some people will probably want to get protein anywhere they can get it, but probably not from beer. Those are categories that were very low in the natural to add protein rating, and also people just not very interested in trying it. And then there's this whole group of products in the middle, things like ice cream and pretzels and popcorn and coffee creamer and candy and water, where energy drinks, where people are undecided and they kind of gravitate toward this 0-0 intersection of the axes in our chart. But if you look at different consumer groups, there's actually vastly different opinions. So it's not that nobody wants coffee with protein added. It's actually something that is much more appealing to younger people than to older people. Same with chocolate or chips. These are things that younger Americans, and this is what we saw across our research, younger people across the board in basically every category see it as more natural to add protein to more categories and are more interested in trying these things. So if you're thinking about the consumer of the future, this idea of, protein fruit chews or something like that, which to some people may sound stupid and unnecessary, are actually kind of appealing. So you ask, are we at peak protein? I think not even close, because these products are still very nascent and younger consumers are much more interested in trying them. So a lot of them won't work out. Obviously, it comes down to product quality and price and value and distribution and supply chain and all those things that make consumer products either successful or unsuccessful. But there is definitely interest in this. There are a lot of people who are trying to get more protein, who believe it is going to make them more healthy. A lot of those are younger people, and they are more interested in these products. So nowhere near peak. Not everything will be successful. A lot of these will fail. And it's going to be really interesting to see who does well and who doesn't.
I think that we're going to see a lot of new innovations coming up. As you said, like some things will work, some things will not work or go into the routine of the consumer. But I also recognize that the protein, for example, in the yogurt that I'm consuming, I recognize that they added like with big letters and like with a badge that 7 grams of protein, something like that, which is like, of course, in the yogurt, there's protein. I knew that. I mean, you don't need to, punctuate on that. But since there is a trend now, I think it's normal that these companies and these brands are adding those branding to their packaging as well.
Yeah. Well, it's actually interesting because I just moved to Paris for a while, and I was trying to find a new yogurt brand here. And you really have to read the packaging, because not every brand has high protein, and it's a little different here. The Greek yogurt here tends to have lower protein than it does in the US and higher fat content. And it's the Skyr product here, SKYR, that more Icelandic one that has just the kind of overly accentuated protein. So I went from a Greek yogurt buyer customer to being a Icelandic yogurt customer in this market. And then there's a lot of stuff that just doesn't really have that much protein. So it is interesting to actually look at the labels and see what has what you want and what doesn't.
Yeah, and also in Europe, what I see is just like especially in the yogurt category, there's like the lactose free is a bigger category overall in Europe. Whereas here, I don't see like big sections or in the supermarkets for lactose free products. It's just like here and there.
Hand, yeah, I don't see A2 here much, whereas in the States, A2 is really having quite a bit of new innovation. So I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. So there's like an interesting part that because GLP is it's one of the most popular things that I see in your reports, that you have a big section about GLP products, GLP-1s for the weight loss. I was expecting the interesting thing that I see in that report was GLP users are spending more on food now, which I would expect that since people are on GLP, they would eat less and the consumption will go down, whereas I think the consumption is going up. Is that because they are trading up on products, or can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, and that's an interesting one because that is where both the spending data and the sentiment data are in agreement. So some of it is demographic. If you look at who's on GLP-1s, they were already greater than average spenders on food and CPG to begin with. And that's from Circana, which used to be called IRI. And they do a lot of really great webinars and data publications about GLP-1 users. So if you want to do a deep dive, look for some of their decks that they put out because they're full of actual transaction data, and it's really interesting. Numerator is another one that's also put out some great research based on actual scanner transactions. So not just these surveys where people say, oh yeah, I'm eating so many more salads and I'm eating more chicken, but this is based on actual transaction. Some of it, again, demographic. So these people were paying more already than the average consumer. They do spend differently over time. They shop different categories. So things like wine have gone down for them, whereas things like chicken go up. But if you spend time with people who are on GLP-1s, you see how their habits actually change. They're eating less or less frequently. They still have to eat. Protein, they're advised to eat more protein than less. And protein is the most expensive, often part of a meal. And if you're going to eat less, you might as well eat better. At least I think that is the thinking for a lot of people. So perhaps a higher quality or a more expensive option. And then also treating yourself. There's still a lot of that. You may have fewer desserts, but you're still often having a few bites of dessert. And things like French fries have actually done very well among GLP-1 users. They're not going to eat the whole tray, but why not have a couple of fries with your salad if you are not going to eat the whole, if you don't feel like you're going to stuff your face with all of them. And also spending on non-food items has gone up too. In our surveys, the majority of people on GLP-1s say they feel like a different person. And so if you feel like a different person, you want to reinvent yourself, you're going to spend more money on things like clothes. Some of that is, again, out of necessity. Your clothes are too big. You need a new set, but also, hey, you know what? You're feeling good. You look different. Maybe dress differently. Maybe get a new handbag, get some new shoes. If you feel like you are healthier or want to, in our survey, people say they have better mental health, they're having more sex, all these things like, yeah, maybe you want to get a nice outfit on and go out.
Yeah.
And go out to the restaurant. And even though you're going to eat less, and maybe cut back a little bit on portion sizes or order fewer items, you still want to be alive and be a human. I think that a lot of this ends up being actually common sense. It's just like, well, what would you do if you had the ability to eat less? Well, maybe you're going to eat nicer things. You're going to go out more. And that shows up in our research too. In our winter survey, which we did in December, we asked our panel across lots of different categories of consumer products, are you trading up or trading down to more expensive or more premium products and brands? And GLP-1 users said they were trading up on a net average basis in every single category in our list. So,
okay, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and perhaps some of that is they like to believe they are, but certainly at a much higher rate than the overall. So I think that is still, and we're just getting started with that too. There's going to be pills that are a lot less invasive and a lot more easy to consume. They're not quite as dramatically effective, but they're still effective, and that's just going to be a lot more people. The estimates vary. There's no official count for how many people are on them, but it's right now in the millions of people in the U.S. I wrote an article recently about some new research from Morgan Stanley that estimates that 5% of Americans are on them right now. Other reports say it's 25% of households. It's all a little tricky because it's not apples to apples. Some people go on, there's a lot of churn, people go on and off. So what are you actually measuring? But at any rate, it's a lot of people and it's going to triple. So the nice thing, though, I would say is that I think there were a lot of people who were very full of doom. Oh, the food industry's hosed. People are just going to stop spending money on food. And certainly there are categories of food that are going to do worse than others, and some that will do better than others. And if there are companies that are overly concentrated in the types of things that do get consumed less, that's going to be problematic. But there's still a lot of opportunity for growth and to capture the kind of where the puck is going, and that's where I think is exciting, and that's what we're looking for, both as for my analysis and writing, and also I'm sure for the investors in the audience too.
Yeah. And when you say, like, we talked about GLP users mainly now that are trading up and they're spending more and so on. But looking to the report that you published in December, the inflation is the biggest problem of the consumer, yet they are, around the holiday times, they have been spending a lot. How does this dilemma make sense? Like, they are quite worried about inflation, whereas they are still spending. So would that mean that they are not that pessimistic?
Well, I think that I have a theory, which is that, so, right now, the what's interesting right now is that U.S. consumer sentiment is, I think, at its lowest point ever. If you look at the University of Michigan survey, which is kind of the one that everyone talks about. Although I'm working on some research now about the methodology there, and I think there's some. I saw a very funny conspiracy theory video about this last year, but it actually looks like they are severely over-indexing on Democrats in their survey, who are much more pessimistic right now than conservatives, and that is accounting for a lot of the decline in consumer sentiment. So I don't know. That's still a work in progress. I'm trying to figure that out. So perhaps the actual average consumer is not as pessimistic as the numbers suggest, if you properly account for political leaning. I also have another theory, which is that if you go on social media, it makes it seem like you're supposed to be pessimistic right now because other people are. And so that feedback loop has never made it easier to feel bad than it is now, because there's a lot of other people just talking about how bad everything is. The truth is that it's not great for everybody. There are people who are suffering for sure. But if you look at inflation, wages have actually kept up with inflation, and almost entirely. So the theory that I've read, I didn't come up with this, but it makes a lot of sense, is that when people make more money, they see that as something that they earned, that they have done for themselves, and that they should be able to buy more things. And when prices go up, they see that as something that the system is doing to them, that they have no control over, and therefore they should be upset about. So when wages and inflation go up a lot at the same time, there's a disconnect between, I am supposed to be having a much better life than I was before, but prices are so high now I can't. And then there's obviously a lot of things out of the control of the consumer. Obviously, COVID was one of them. The tariff stuff was another one. The war now, all this geopolitical conflict. People are either upset or just frustrated, and I get it. So that makes a lot of sense. And then the other thing that's going on is that the wealthiest U.S. consumers have just done dramatically better than the poorest consumers. So, many people call this the K-shaped recovery from COVID. It is a real thing. There is a stat that goes around that is something like the top 10% of consumers are now doing 50% of spending or something like that. It comes from Moody's, and it's not as simple as it sounds. There again, that's another one of those things where there's not actually an official way to measure that. So everybody has their own methodology, and Moody's methodology is and they have admitted this is just a very specific way of measuring it. It's based on, I believe, depletion of savings and not actual spending. So I may be wrong about that, but it's not a perfect measure of spending. And still, it's very plausible that the wealthiest people are just spending a lot more money because they're making a lot more money and they have a lot more money. That obviously, there's I forgot the exact number, but I published it in one of our reports. There's a lot of millionaires in the U.S. There's I don't want to make up the wrong number.
24 million, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
Because
something like that.
in your data it shows nearly 24 million millionaires.
That's
Not
what it is.
not
So that's a
billionaires.
lot of people that you can sell fancy products to,
Yeah.
and therefore a lot of fancy products get introduced to market, whether it's expensive food or $30 smoothies or cars. The average price of the car keeps going up. Function health, things like that, like very luxurious medical services. There is a large population of people that can be marketed to those services, and there's some frustration among lower earners that a lot of things are kind of not made for them. But so of course people are going to be upset about higher prices. No one's going to be happy about it. But
Yeah.
for various reasons, it's not as bad as people think it is, but at least not for everybody. For some people, I'm sure it is. And then of course now, this is, I don't know if you want to talk about AI, but this is another one of those things where AI is here and it's going
Yeah.
to get bigger. And a lot of people see that as opportunistic. And a lot of people see that as just another thing that's going to be done to them that they have no control over and are angry about it. And so that's another one of those things where no one actually knows how dramatically AI is going to change the consumer experience. There's a lot of doomsday fantasies, and sure, some of that stuff is possible. Most of it is unlikely. But having covered technology for more than 20 years, like that is a thing that happens. Technology does change the way that people live, and it creates opportunity for a lot of people that didn't have it before, and therefore makes it harder for other people. And it's going to be tough.
And talking about AI, because on the reports that it says older consumers seem more pessimistic on AI, which we know, and millennials are more optimistic, and Gen Z is actually using it heavily, but they are more skeptical about
Yeah.
AI, which in our family I also have that. We have a Gen Z. I have a Gen Z niece, which is like she's using it too much, but she's just like it's not good for the world and so on. Why do you think that they are using it more, but they are more skeptical about it?
And it's funny because I have a 5-year-old and all he wants to do is make ChatGPT images of, trains and Legos and all kinds of stuff. So there's a few things going on. One is that I think millennials, it's very interesting. Millennials in almost every topic we cover is just more enthusiastic and more interested and more willing than any other generation. I think that some of it is kind of cultural. I think some of it is that they are coming into their highest earning decades and are kind of in the prime of their lives right now. But I think there is something to this kind of the Gen Z kind of de-evolution in many ways, where they're not as optimistic as millennials. They've seen technology, screw a lot of things up. And they're at a sensitive age now where they are becoming adults. They are entering the workforce. And look, there may be actually much more opportunity than they could ever imagine coming for them if they know how to use this technology. And I think digital native users of technology just tend to use it better and more fluently. And therefore, the Gen Zs who can do AI well are going to be able to create tremendous opportunity. That's what I believe. But a lot of them also see it as limiting their career opportunities, at least in the short run. And that is showing up in data you see too, applicants per job, all sorts of things, just not as favorable as once were. So there is a spike in skepticism and in pessimism about it when you go down from millennials to Gen Z. Is that just how younger people approach everything? Are they, just more upset about things the way, when we were in high school, selling out was a big problem. The man, everybody complained about the man, and now those people are the man. So we'll see. I'm not entirely sure about that. I think younger people always kind of have some beef with society, and then they learn how to play the game, and then they do well, and then it's okay. But it's definitely going to shape their lives more than anyone else's because they're the ones who are at the beginning of their careers. They're the ones who are coming into adulthood when AI technology is about to perhaps have a profound effect.
Yeah.
on everything from employment to what a job looks like, how the world works, how companies are created and perhaps are destroyed. Tiny risk that everything will just end, you know? It is a little crazy.
It's a little crazy, but I mean, since we moved to the Gen Z topic, because brands and marketers are always having an assumption about Gen Z, and sometimes, they are not loyal to brands, and we get to assume them as a different generation, which we don't know of too much, but we are also making too much assumptions about them. What do we get wrong about Gen Z? Because in your reports, there are interesting data about Gen Z and how they shop, how they live, and so on. What do you think, for example, can they be loyal to a brand? And what's the reason for loyalty for them?
Well, there's certainly, they can be loyal. I mean, this is another one of those things where there's tens of millions, so it's going to be hard to get it all right with everybody. But a couple of things that really stand out to me is just they're very entrepreneurial, and the pessimistic way of looking at that is, well, they kind of have to be, because the institutions that Gen X and millennials have ridden over the last few decades are going to zero in many cases. And therefore, you need a side hustle because your main job is just not going to be enough. But then there's just, there's so many fewer institutions with, as gatekeepers as there were. And you can become famous overnight out of nowhere. And younger people really get that. And some of them really want that. Some don't. They have a much closer relationship with individual entertainers and creators as older people. They're much more into the YouTube kind of style of fame, and less interested in traditional Hollywood. They're highly contradictory too, just as everyone is. They make very strong claims about their environmental sustainability, and then they go shop at Shein. But they also love cheap stuff. Who doesn't love just cheap, fun stuff too? So there, if you look through the research, there are many areas where millennials and Gen Z, who are the kind of two generations that grew up with the internet, many ways they act similarly, and there are other ways where they start to diverge. I think AI is a big one, where the sentiment around AI is just much more positive around millennials as it is with Gen Z. Although that may have changed too. This is now a fast changing world and topic. So I'm very curious. We're about to do our next wave of research in the next couple of months, and I'm very interested to see how some of that changes over the span of 6 months or a year, since we asked some of the previous questions in surveys last summer or winter.
Yeah. Do they get loyal to brands easily, or don't they?
Oh, right. You asked. They can. We looked at the beauty industry, for example, and they're definitely using more brands and trying more brands, but they also show strong loyalty signal. I did an interview at the National Retail Federation last year with Katie Welch, who was at that point ran marketing for Rare Beauty, and I asked her that question. I said, there's a lot of people think Gen Z are not loyal. You actually are running one of the most important Gen Z brands. You tell me. And she said, it's both. They certainly can be very loyal, and they also want to try a bunch of things. So, and I think that video may be available to watch. It was a really interesting conversation with Katie. So it's a little bit of both. Perhaps, again, this is a generation that's just going to have more choice than any one that came before it. And so I think it's natural, and there's just fewer gatekeepers over distribution, and they're going to be able to choose new stuff all the time. There's certainly not a lot of new brands popping up all the time, but I think it's pretty human. Once you found something that really works well for you, whether it's a formulation or a flavor or a scent, you're going to stick with it for at least a while. And I think that is, I think that's human nature in many ways.
Can you tell a bit about the TikTok shop? It's growing fast. Is it only price, discoverability, and convenience? Or is it something else that makes TikTok grow that fast? TikTok shop.
Yeah, really maybe the fastest growing merchant in the world in history. Just such an interesting thing, because a lot of companies have talked about using content to drive e-commerce, and This is just by far the most successful example of that. Just a massive. I don't have the current GMV figures, but it's a lot of spending that came out basically from zero in a few years. I think there's a few interesting things here. One is that TikTok users have embraced it. There was a possibility where they said, we don't want to buy anything on TikTok. No thanks. We'll stop using TikTok. And that didn't happen. They continue to use TikTok. And, I would say credit to the team at TikTok for making a shopping experience that has as little friction as possible, because as you see with Facebook, with OpenAI, it's actually very hard to build a shopping cart and a low friction shopping experience. And TikTok did it, and it works very well. I bought a couple things off there. I'm by far not the target demo, but it has been a very pleasant and easy shopping experience. There's also the TikTok creators, people who are trying to become famous, trying to build followings, and TikTok has made it very easy for people to become affiliates and to drive commerce sales. There are thousands of people who are making money, very small amounts of it for some, very large for others, making videos on spec for free that they hope will drive transactions on TikTok Shop. And that has been driving most of the growth on the platform. There's obviously the actual storefront within the app, and there's live shopping and that sort of thing. But this creator, whatever you want to call it, fleet or population that's willing to put in the legwork for free and with the hopes of making money is a very unique asset, and has driven the success. And there's just a lot of stuff on there that's inexpensive, and people like cheap, fun stuff. There used to be dollar stores or novelty stores, and now if you're on your phone all the time, why even bother going to one where you can get lipstick or hairbrush, or I bought a travel steamer for just an absurdly inexpensive amount of money. And why not try buying a bunch of stuff on there and see if it's any good? And that's kind of the fun of the videos too. A lot of them are, is this thing too good to be true? Kind of, that sort of thing. But I don't know where the ceiling is on that. I actually haven't looked at the spending data recently. It may be that it's kind of slowed down quite a bit. I'm not sure, but it is just a really fascinating thing that came out of nowhere. And we were among the first to publish research about it the way that we did. And, just a really tremendous thing that's been built. And meanwhile, the entire time, people not knowing whether the government would ban TikTok or force this transaction. Very interesting to see what the new owners, if that's even really a thing, how they change the strategy around it. It seems to still be going, so we'll see.
Since you were watching the growth of DTC and then, e-commerce DTC, and now there's like the social shopping, which is especially the TikTok shopping. Do you see any risks to TikTok shopping, or do you see an evolution or a trend coming up from this, as you have been exploring so many different sales channels in the past?
What's been interesting is how many big brands struggle there. And I think that, that makes some sense. Big brands are typically not very good at moving quickly or really understanding how to talk to young people. It's just a different thing. But there's also just a lot of products that don't make sense for TikTok Shop. Novelty really works there. Beauty products work there. Things that have a very visual effect, because that's what the videos tend to be. But sleepier products don't really do well there. And that makes sense. So it's a different kind of shopping than, say, Amazon or, direct to consumer. I think social shopping will continue to grow as long as there's people who are willing to be talent for free or for on spec. Whatnot is a channel that I've been paying close attention to that does live shopping and has grown a lot. Every time you go on the Amazon homepage, you see they want you to watch their live shopping. eBay has it. So there's something there. It's fascinating to see it not really work on Instagram time after time, and Twitter and other platforms. YouTube, I'm surprised that they haven't been more into commerce than they have been, but I guess advertising is really working for them. So maybe they'll save that for when they need some growth. It is just a different type of content too. So yeah, I think social shopping is definitely going to be more important. Young people despite all the narrative around people want to get off the internet, they don't want to be on their phones. It's not true. People love their phones. Phones are great, and they want to be entertained all the time. So that's, as long as you can charge your phone, there's going to be people on their phone.
And also, like some of the tactics or some of the things that people are trying and repeating again and again will become old and obsolete. And just like ads on the phones, which we are like scrolling and we are not paying attention, probably at a certain point, some of the creator-led commerce will be in the same shoes of the ads, online ads that we have been seeing. I mean, people would be skipping some of those and would
Yeah,
be looking for some trust, for some, credibility or something like that. Because
maybe. I
it's an
mean,
ad
I
at the
think,
end of the day.
yeah, what's been interesting is actually to see a lot of burnout among creators. And that's a real thing where they have to just do so much for the algorithm now that it's exhausting. And so people just stop doing it. Ads still work. There's still a lot of ads that drive a lot of business. So,
Yeah.
no one admits that they love ads, but they work. They don't work that well, but they work well enough that people keep using them. So,
Yeah.
yeah, there's always going to be something new. And so, gaming is something that is going to keep growing. AI, friendships and relationships and entertainment we're very much at the beginning of that. We'll see where that goes, but there's always something new.
Since you have started talking about gaming, AI, and so on, so are there like some things that you are already hoping to put on the predictions list?
AI is something we'll be studying, ongoing. We're very interested in how people are really thinking about alcohol. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of people are still unsure of what's really going to happen with drinking. Is it the new cigarettes or not? So we're going to do some research on that. Those are the two that we're talking about right now, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of new stuff, and and we'll see.
I'm personally looking forward to read some of the upcoming reports. And
Thank you. I'm looking forward to writing them.
thanks so much for joining me in the show.
Anyone can send me an email if you want to get in touch, dan@newconsumer.com, or check out the reports, newconsumer.com/trends. They're free to read, and I would love to hear what you think or if you have ideas for future topics.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.